The Babylonian Captivity illustrates the waning of Roman Catholicism. Roman Catholicism was the cosmological and cultural system of Western Europe. Western Europeans looked to Roman Catholicism for explanations about the world and ways to express their understanding of the world. Unlike other institutions in medieval Europe, the Roman Catholic Church created a veneer of centralization. The Catholic Church was born in the dying days of the Roman Empire. It maintained a veneer of centralization. If you simply looked at the Catholic Church from the outside, it appeared to be highly centralized. That's because one of the central features of a Catholic Church is apostolic succession. Bishops passed their authority to teach from one person to another, so that in the major cities of the Mediterranean world, bishops could trace their lineage back to Peter, Paul, Mark, some connection to the apostles of Jesus. Those apostles then handed on their authority and created new bishoprics in the rest of the world. And so all of the Western European bishops traced their lineage back to Rome. All of these churches believed in sacramental grace, that there were rituals officiated by the church, and those rituals had power to transform a human being. Without the sacraments, human beings were destined to hell. With the sacraments, human beings could overcome all of the obstacles, all of the temptations in this world, and walk a narrow path into the kingdom of heaven. Western Europeans, Eastern Europeans, all traced their creedal statement back to Nicaea. The Nicene Creed in 325 is that Trinitarian doctrine that says there are three persons in one God, the Father, the Son, and the Spirit. So a Catholic Church has all of these features: apostolic succession, sacramental grace, Nicene Creed. Both the Roman Catholic Church and the Greek Orthodox Church had these features of Catholicism. What set the Roman Catholic Church apart was the Petrine doctrine, that the Bishop of Rome was the direct successor of Peter. Jesus turned to Peter and said, "On this rock I shall build my church." It's that line that the bishops of Rome pointed to when they wanted to solidify their sovereignty over the church as the key doctrinal gatekeepers on earth. The tension, though, of that veneer of centralization came up against dynastic loyalties. Royal families, noble families across Europe appointed, nominated, suggested names for bishops within the Roman Catholic Church. This was not a problem in the Greek Orthodox Church, because in the Greek Orthodox Church, the Caesar was the head of the church too. But here in Western Europe, the church and the state were separate institutions. They may have been intertwined familially, but once a man left his family and became part of the church, and even when women left their family and became part of a church, there was a divided loyalty. Sometimes individuals would side with the church, other times they would side with their family. So there was a much more fragmented church hierarchy than the simple top-down approach would appear, right? That veneer of centralization covers up a high degree of ethnic, tribal, family divisions within the Roman Catholic Church. The creedal statements, like the Nicene Creed, also cover up or hide syncretism. Syncretism is the blending of different cultures and beliefs. So one would think by reading the creed, oh, well, this is really simple. Everybody believes in a Trinity. But if you start looking at the local rituals and local practices, you'll see that the Roman Catholic Church allowed for regional variations and local customs to seep into Roman Catholic teachings. So, for example, the most sacred day of the year in the Christian calendar is the resurrection. The Greek Orthodox Church called it the Paschal Feast, and that name illustrates the continuation of a Jewish tradition, the Passover feast, that the angel of death passed over the Hebrew people when they were in Egypt. Just as now a person who becomes a Christian, the angel of death will pass over them and they can enter into eternal life. But in Western Europe, the name, particularly Northern Western Europe, the name starts to change. Instead of calling it a Paschal feast or the Paschal holiday, it now becomes Easter. Most likely, that is a name for a German fertility goddess. And so on that holiday, you have eggs and bunnies and all kinds of things that represent new life, new beginnings, more fertility. That's not part of the original Christian Paschal feast, right? That's about the resurrection. But the Catholic Church encouraged that to bring in, draw more people, and provide a greater degree of popularity. Another feast is All Hallows Eve, what we call Halloween, because there's a day of the year where there is All Saints Day, right? That's the 1st of November. The night before is All Hallows Eve. On that night, this is another pagan ritual. On that night, all of the restless spirits get up and wander around. And so people put gifts outside their door. They put a treat so that the ghost wouldn't come and trick them and play tricks on them. This eventually evolves into what we call Halloween, devoid of any of these religious connotations. But the Roman Catholic Church didn't try to stamp out those local customs, practices, superstition, because by adopting them, baptizing it, it pulled in more people. Another invented Christian holiday was Christmas, right? So certainly there is a moment in the Bible that talks about the birth of Jesus. But that birth of Jesus is not associated with any day or even really a time of the year that you can easily identify. At the end of the Roman Empire, Christians put that celebration at December 25th because September 25th fell in the feast of Saturnalia. Saturnalia is when Saturn dies, right? The whole solar calendar or whole solar system comes to a halt and then is reborn. It's the darkest part of the year. What is Jesus? Jesus is the light of the world. And so Christians, Catholics were willing and able to adapt and blend their cosmology and their mythology with local customs to make Roman Catholicism much more acceptable. But what this means is that the veneer of uniformity glosses over the incredible local practices and customs throughout Western Christendom. The Babylonian Captivity, though, is about a decision by popes to live in Avignon instead of Rome. Avignon is in southern France on the Rhone River. Between 1305 and 1378, the bishops of Rome, the popes, made this a residence. And you can see in the bottom picture that this wasn't a chateau in the sense that it's a palace, but it was a castle. The bishops of Rome by this time were monarchs in their own right, and they wanted a safe, secure location. The bishops of Rome didn't find Rome wealthy enough, worthy enough, secure enough to be the palace of the Pope. So they decided to live in the French kingdom on the Rhone River. Here's an aerial view. You can see that it is a monumental undertaking to construct a residence for the Bishop of Rome hundreds of miles away from where it began. This was at an important crossroads for trade that did reemerge in the High Middle Ages. So the Pope understood that this was a secure location for him. It was a strategic location in terms of gathering wealth, and it was closer for him to his family connections because came from French noble families. Why is this a problem? Well, the Bishop of Rome should be the Bishop of Rome. Peter died in Rome. Jesus gave the authority to rule to Peter. When the 100 Years' War hit, when the famine hit, when the Black Death hit, it was not hard for Western Europeans to jump to the conclusion that God was angry because the Bishop of Rome was not in Rome. And so this started a whole debate over where should the Pope reside. Should the Pope, the successor of Peter, reside in Rome, or was it okay for him to live in Avignon? This led to a schism. There was already a schism or a split between the Greek Orthodox Church and the Roman Catholic Church, but this was a schism, a split among the bishops of the Roman Catholic Church. Some of them wanted the Pope to go to Rome. Some of them thought it was okay to stay in Avignon. The critics called this a Babylonian captivity. Just like God punished the Jews with captivity in Babylon, God was punishing Christians with a captivity in Avignon. Pope Gregory XI died in March of 1378, and he died in Rome. His residence was in Avignon. He was visiting Rome, and while he was in Rome, he died. That opened up the door for the College of Cardinals to elect a new pope. The people of Rome wanted a pope to live in Rome. And so they gathered outside. They put pressure as a mob for the College of Cardinals, 16 men, and they elected Urban VI, who was committed to staying in Rome. Those cardinals then left Rome, right? And 13 of them elected a second pope, Robert of Geneva, and called him Clement VII. And Clement resided in Avignon. So in a very short period of time, with the death of one pope, all of a sudden there are two popes. Authority, sovereignty is indivisible. It can't be divided. There can only be one king at a time. There can only be one pope at a time. This further divided both the bishops and the secular princes, the secular kings across Europe. As each pope died, they had appointed new cardinals. Those cardinals elected new popes. And so eventually, at the end of the 14th century, there were two papal lines, and it seemed like there were irreconcilable differences. The Council of Pisa tried to end all this, but they ended up adding a third pope because no one would recognize this third pope. So they had two lines that stretched back to Urban VI, another one to Clement VII, and now the Council of Pisa added a third. Finally, the Council of Constance in 1414 was able to elect Martin V, and Martin was able to finally bring all of the Roman Catholic bishops together and ended the schism. But by this time, the damage was done. There was no going back. Bishops found out that they could challenge popes. And it produced what is called the conciliar movement. That, like the Council of Nicaea, councils of bishops should guide and direct popes. That the unquestioned sovereignty of a pope was over. But not only did it produce a movement among bishops, outside of the church, among noblemen and among commoners, the damage to the prestige of the papacy had already been done. And so the unity of the Roman Catholic Church, that was only a veneer to begin with, cracked wide open. And the divisions within Western Christendom emerged. And so what had been a holy Catholic apostolic church coming out of Nicaea, or what at least looked on the surface as a one holy Catholic and apostolic church coming out of Nicaea, was now that shell, right, that was cracked, that veneer was cracked. And Christendom in Western Europe was never going to be the same. And so one of the features of modern Christianity, right, post 1500 Christianity, is the fact that there are multiple versions of Christianity in the modern world. That begins with the Babylonian captivity. So the Babylonian captivity illustrates the waning of Roman Catholicism.